From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Here's what's ahead. From the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Jim Robb joins us to provide this week's cattle market commentary. He'll share the LMIC's outlook on beef, pork, and poultry output here in 2019. And Jim looks ahead to the USDA's next Cattle on Feed report out this Friday. Then K-State's Brian Briggeman talks about the contribution of farmer cooperatives to the Kansas economy. That was the subject of a new study conducted at K-State, which illustrates the economic importance of cooperatives to local and regional economies in the state. And on this week's 4-H segment, Jeff Wickman talks with K-State's Chris Mullins and Pam Van Horn about the upcoming 4-H shooting sports training. All that and more right here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is Agriculture Today. Good to have you aboard once again. We're going down the line now to the Livestock Marketing Information Center based in Denver, and a project supported, of course, by K-State Research and Extension to talk cattle markets now. Jim Robb is with us once more, senior economist with the LMIC. Well, Jim, let's begin by addressing the ongoing effects of adverse weather on the cattle movement, cattle sales, potential cattle performance in the high plains and the central plains. It's been just a mess throughout this region.
It has, Eric. And, this last week we actually, because of the severe weather, we had cattle slaughter pulled down, not dramatically, but on a nationwide basis. We were down about 2% year over year on cattle slaughter, and that was completely caused by the fed cattle plants, especially in Nebraska and some in Kansas being shut down, and in Iowa too. So that's been an ongoing story. The mud has been dramatic in the Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas. But when we look at Colorado and Texas, we've had a much different scenario where it's not been quite as bad in terms of muddy feed yards, especially in the Texas Panhandle. So it's been a mixed bag, and I think those things will show up as we look ahead in the market. And really already are. We have cattle weights well below last year, and the weather market and those cattle weight impacts probably linger well through the spring months.
And if, in fact, they do, as would be widely anticipated, what kind of repercussions will that have for the market, do you think?
Well, it really keeps our fed cattle market with a rather solid underpinning. Fed cattle prices have rebounded a little bit. The futures strengthened last Friday, partly pulled along by a robust hog market. Record contract high prices for the current contracts in most of the hog markets on the ideas of rather tight numbers, but importantly, potential for these exports to finally materialize to China, which we've seen show up in the weekly data. So there's a lot of moving parts here in this marketplace. And as we look ahead, some of these things are going to continue to impact the marketplace across the species.
The boxed beef trade this past week, well, it's been relatively firm as a trend goes. What was the latest reading you had on that?
Well, we had some delayed reports by USDA, but we had a stronger market on the wholesale beef market this past week. In fact, we had the strongest weekly average, as we estimated it, since late June 2018. So the highest wholesale beef market since last June. That's a good sign here. It's certainly supporting our fed cattle prices.
You have put together some observations, Jim, on total red meat and poultry production here in the U.S. in 2019, and you say the relationship between the various meat sources are changing. What's the story?
Well, I think it's an important story, Eric, one that's probably not fully recognized at this point in time. Since 2014, we've added on a per capita basis what each person ate in the United States on total red meat and poultry retail weight. We've added nearly 8 pounds, and that's a big percentage increase. We went from some of the lowest numbers to some of the highest numbers in history. So this headwind of the last 4 or 5 years of more total red meat and poultry ahead, increased domestic production, even though we've had rather good exports, the production has evolved into larger supplies in front of consumers at the meat case and in the restaurant. That picture really does change here somewhat in 2019. We actually see for the first time in 4 or 5 years a decline in the per capita consumption or disappearance number, driven by great moderation in output of poultry items, chicken and turkey both. Now, that's very dependent on grain prices as we look ahead this summer, but the rate of growth, in fact, we expect by 2020 that chicken output may decline slightly year over year, which is not the normal occurrence, is for chicken to increase every year. Our rate of growth in pork output nationwide is starting to moderate. We think those numbers will be reinforce that expectation of some moderating rate of growth, still growing in the pork complex for 2019 and 2020 in the upcoming hogs and pigs report. So instead of more total red meat and poultry supplies ahead, on a per capita basis, this is going to decline. It may not decline much, but that's an important change in the marketplace from what we've dealt with for about 5 years now, Eric.
This has to be read as price-friendly for a longer pull, if you will, for the beef cattle sector then, does it not?
It does, Eric, and if we're competing meats are not growing as fast as they were or actually declining maybe slightly on the poultry side, we have a little bit more room here to maintain these wholesale beef prices, retail beef prices, and then back on to cattle prices. So it's not a one-to-one trade-off. We don't eat 1 more pound of beef or 1 more pound of chicken, but the overall picture is important to have in context. And again, this is a different picture than we painted for the last 5 years or so.
You mentioned there the cost of feeding poultry. Jim, there are these concerns, and now we're drifting over into the crop production side a bit, about timely planting of the corn crop. And if there are issues there, that could eventually resonate in the livestock sector, including the cattle market.
Absolutely, Eric. And the poultry sectors are very sensitive to the crop prices in terms of profitability. We're very sensitive in the beef marketplace too, but poultry even more magnified. So this is a critical time. We talked to our members here. We had a weekly conference call with our members in the Delta states, and they said this is peak corn planting time, and they're not going to be planting corn anytime soon because of flooding and very wet field conditions. And so they're thinking there'll be more soybean acres where people would rather plant corn. And we look at the northern plains, we have a very large snow covering, and we've had flooding in Nebraska. So this crop planting dynamic, when we have this, and we've had it in the past, of delayed plantings and the crop mix changing for producers, really can be a whipsaw in the marketplace, and then livestock industries will be paying attention, and again, very much from a poultry side and hog side, this can have some rather near-term repercussions in terms of their production levels by the end of this calendar year.
Well, let's finish off by looking at 2 forthcoming USDA reports. A rarity will have a second cattle on feed report issued in a single month of March in this case, and that had to do with the government shutdown and the schedule thrown off on those cattle on feed releases. But these numbers coming out this coming Friday, the trade is expected to put a little more stock in those, Jim.
I think they will, and it's a weather story partly. Again, these are the February placements and marketing numbers and the March 1st on-feed inventory count. And we think there'll be a dichotomy like there has in recent months where the southern plains have maybe likely more cattle placed into feed yards than a year ago, the deep southern plains, especially the Texas Panhandle and South Texas. And then Colorado will probably have placements again above a year ago, much like they have in the recent months. But Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa probably have, because of the muddy lots, placements below a year ago. And placements are down because producers out there on the cow-calf side have muddy conditions. It's hard to move cattle to feed yards, and feed yards have muddy conditions. It's hard to clean pens and bring cattle into feed yards. So on balance, our expectation is placements will be down 2 to 3% year over year. Not a huge decline, but building on the declines in recent months, going back into late 2018 due to muddy conditions. Marketing should be slightly above a year ago, which is good news. And that'll give us an on-feed count, Eric, of about 100% of a year ago. Pretty close to right on to a year ago's number. Again, a bit of a change. Now, many of these cattle are still out there to be placed, but this is the first time in several years that we've not had a fairly significant year-over-year increase in the number of cattle on feed. And so, again, different parts of the U.S. it's a hard report to call because looking at the contrast between Central and South Texas placements and Kansas placements may be quite different. And so there's a wide range on the expectations amongst the market analysts, but on balance, we would think these placements are still down due to Mother Nature.
And those numbers, again, coming out this coming Friday. And lastly, you are interested in the crossover effect on the beef cattle trade of this upcoming USDA hogs and pigs report. You talked about how the cattle market reacted to the news about Chinese purchases of U.S. pork. This is in the same vein.
Absolutely. Hog producer returns, according to the Iowa State Series, have been in the red for about 6 consecutive months. Now, that's total profitability, so they, will produce with some red ink. But we think it's starting to have an impact on the industry. We expect that the number of market hogs is up a shade over 2% year over year. And the overall hog inventory is about 2% above a year ago. And that's a bit of a moderating story compared to what we've had over the last couple of years, where these numbers at many quarters have been larger than that. This feeds into the overall perspective that we may see some moderation. In fact, if we look at the market hogs, this is a number that moves around a little bit. But if we're pulling back our sow herd a little bit, lack of profitability, and if feedstuffs go from this point a little bit higher, we think there's a very good chance that we'll see some year-over-year growth that is about half the pace of 2018's and 2019. So that's important to watch from a total red meat and poultry perspective, and also from a beef perspective, is how this hogs and pigs report comes out towards the end of the month.
All sorts of dynamics in play. And Jim, we appreciate your insight. Many thanks. We'll talk again soon.
It's been my pleasure, Eric.
From the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Senior Economist Jim Robb, here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Welcome back. You're tuned to Agriculture Today. We'll share with you on this segment of the broadcast new information out of the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center in the Department of Agricultural Economics here at Kansas State University. It taps into something that really hasn't been studied formally before, surprisingly enough, and that is the contribution of farmer cooperatives to the Kansas economy. Brian Briggeman is the director of that center, and he's Mike's side now. And we'll talk of how you went about this analysis. But, Brian, intuitively, we know there's an impact on the part of farm cooperatives on our agricultural economy and otherwise, but it really hasn't been quantified up until this particular effort.
Right, Eric. It is interesting that it hasn't been studied up to this point. But nevertheless, we have the right data today, and we're able to arrive at a pretty sound estimate that gives us an idea of what is that value that these farmer cooperatives provide throughout the state of Kansas. I mean, certainly we know there's a lot of value that are provided directly to farmers. Farmer cooperatives are an integral part of rural America, the farming system, ranching system here in the state of Kansas. But it's also beyond that, too, thinking about the jobs and the income that's generated. So that was something that I worked with Amanda Clymer, my master's student. She took on this project. We really had to come up with some unique data We do have some access to some financial data. We also did a survey of co-op managers and then also pulled in some Department of Labor information as well. So in order to have a fairly good estimate of what is their economic contribution to the state, we did have to, spend a little bit of time collecting the proper data, which we feel that we did.
And you consolidated all of that data. Talk of the survey, first of all, as one component of that. You did ask questions of farmer cooperative managers out there.
Right? Yes, we certainly did. And I guess even maybe beyond the survey, just thinking about some of the other work that we've done with managers and talking about, the impact of farmer co-ops in the state. And clearly from the farm side, we see some really prominent, value that is added within the state of Kansas. I mean, most notably is grain storage. Some of the work that we've done previously with managers, just trying to get a handle of, well, how much upright grain storage is actually out there? We're not talking bunkers or any of the other ground piles that are out there, just upright grain storage. And it's interesting that just over 60% of all upright grain storage in the state of Kansas is tied to a farmer co-op. The remaining 40% is split between farmers themselves and then also with other, non-cooperative businesses, multinationals. So, when we think about the country elevator system that is in the state of Kansas, it really is driven by the cooperative system. So that right there is just tremendous value that's provided directly to farmers among all the other farm supply, energy, spraying services, everything else that they do.
So you gathered the information from those survey participants on all of that, and that was just part of the picture. You used information from CoBank, which is a financial entity in support of the cooperative system as well, right?
Yeah. So we pulled in some of that data, which is pretty representative of not only just the U.S., but also of Kansas. Things like grain sales and income that's driven, and also like cash patronage, for example, that's paid out. So, and of course, that ties right back into the grain system, storage system, right? Being able to send those profits back to farmer owners is key. So in 2017, farmer cooperatives in Kansas paid just over $71 million in cash patronage. Again, that's in 2017. And also too, as far as, these cooperatives of businesses are part of the community, they do pay taxes. And if we look at just the property taxes that are paid, that's over $22 million that's paid within the state. So there's that kind of that direct influx of funds to the farmer community as well within the state.
And then you also, as the third prong of this data, turn to Department of Labor statistics. In what way?
So really there we were very interested in getting estimates for the number of jobs that are directly tied to farmer cooperatives in the state of Kansas. And through that, investigation, we identified there's over 4,600 jobs in the state that farmer cooperatives provide. So that, again, just a huge integral part of rural Kansas, where we see those farming communities, those jobs that are being provided. It's a pretty significant amount.
So you and Amanda threw all of this into the pot to come up with some results, and we're going to share some of the highlights of that today. We would urge folks to take a look at the fact sheet for the full story here. But you really looked at the multiplier effect, which is talked of so much in economic jargon. Share some of the things that came out of this that really caught your attention, Brian.
Sure. So Amanda, through her thesis, did some economic modeling kind of on a regional basis at the state level to see how these jobs, how the business that is conducted with cooperatives, how does it affect the state outside of just the cooperative business itself. The best way to think about the way this model works is take an employee, for example, that earns a wage, and then that employee goes out into their community, purchases groceries, clothing, other retail items, spends their dollars through their community. Well, that happens throughout all the cooperatives, and it creates what you would think of like a ripple effect, right? It has an impact on other businesses, other potential jobs. So that's the economic model that we ran in order to just kind of have an estimate of what are those ripple effects. How does it flow through the state's economy? So the best one to kind of look at is on the jobs, right? So before we talked about it being just over 4,600 jobs that are directly tied to a farmer cooperative. So those jobs also help create just over one additional job. So that's that multiplier effect. The way I like to think about it, it's almost like a BOGO, right? So we get one cooperative job. Well, guess what? We're going to get another one in the state's economy somewhere, because that job that is tied to the cooperative, that individual, again, spends their money throughout the economy, and it helps generate additional jobs. So when we actually look at the total effect, right, it's bigger than the 4,600. In fact, it gets up over 10,000 based off of this economic model that we ran. So again, it's just that ripple effect that occurs through this economic model.
And then once you get that jobs number out there, you can start bringing in some figures on income generation and how co-ops actually contribute to that beyond the borders of the co-op itself.
Right. So if we were to take all the business that's conducted with a co-op. So the cooperative's income that it generates, the patronage it pays out, member income, employee compensation, taxes that are paid. And if we were to look at the direct effect of that total income measure, it's just under $680 million within the state. So farmer cooperatives provide that amount of total income. But again, following with the economic model, there's this ripple effect as it goes through the economy. Certainly employees conduct business, spend their money in the economy, but also, too, the cooperative does business-to-business transactions. There's also the government effect, right, through the taxes that are paid, and how that industry, how it flows through the whole economy. That $680 million then goes up over $1.1 billion. So that total effect, including all the ripple effects through the economy, gets up over $1.1 billion. So not only go back to what we talked about before with the grain storage, I mean, now we also have it's over $1.1 billion industries to the state of Kansas. So farmer cooperatives are pretty integral just beyond even the farm gate as we begin to think about the overall economy of Kansas.
So, Brian, extensive effort went into this particular study and analysis. How do you hope this information can be used from here forward?
So as we think about it, certainly it's something that cooperative employees, managers, directors can use, as talking about, well, this is the value proposition of us to not just you, Mr. Farmer, but also, or Mrs. Farmer, but to the overall state as well. I think where a lot of this impact can be had is at the state legislature level. So I know a number of state senators and congressmen are considering, how about rural revitalization acts and how can we try to kind of breathe some life into the rural areas of our state? Well, one of the things that they can look at with these numbers is the importance of farmer co-ops to rural Kansas. So as they debate various policies or taxes or whatever else that might affect the farmer co-op, it's important for state legislators to know that these farmer co-ops really provide a lot of economic contribution to the state of Kansas.
It really is an interesting read, and you can see it right now at agmanager.info. You're looking for the fact sheet on the contribution of farmer cooperatives to the Kansas economy. Congratulations to you and to Amanda for putting all of this together, and looking forward to seeing this bear fruit even more in the future, Brian.
Thank you, Eric. And also, too, if you would like to go to the Capper Center's website, you can look at this fact sheet there, so at accc.ksu.edu. And also, too, we have some maps that show the coverage of these farmer cooperatives across the state of Kansas, so kind of give you an idea about where they're located and that, as well as these numbers.
Excellent. Much obliged once again.
Thanks, Eric.
He's the director of the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center at Kansas State University, Brian Briggeman. And we'll be back with more here on Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggle to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today continues now here on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson with you. Once again, thanks for joining us. Now to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN, and continued thoughts and prayers for producers and others in Nebraska, southwestern Iowa, northwest Missouri. The Missouri River and several of its tributaries are expected to crest today or tomorrow as the Army Corps of Engineers dialed back the flow releases from a South Dakota dam over the weekend, and most of the threatened areas went without rain over the last couple of days. Still, the river bottom flooding continues as thousands of people were evacuated in Nebraska and Iowa over the weekend. Tens of thousands of acres of Missouri River farm ground are underwater, including some acres still filled with unharvested corn or soybeans from last fall. Further west and north in Nebraska, the receding waters over the weekend revealed devastated towns, farms, and homes, as well as roads and bridges destroyed by the raging rivers. The storms began last week with that combination of snow, heavy rain, and temperatures just warm enough to melt the months of snow in a matter of hours. Ice chunks remained in some areas, but that threat has declined. Now, the Corps reported 20 levees south of Omaha on the Missouri that were topped or breached in Nebraska, Iowa, and Missouri. At least 5 other Corps levees in Missouri are at risk of breach or topping. The Corps stated the Missouri River to Omaha had crested and was near crest at Nebraska City. The river should crest at St. Joseph by Wednesday and at Kansas City by Thursday, though the National Weather Service is warning of possible storms in Missouri and southern Nebraska tonight and possibly into Wednesday. Reforms to China's system for agricultural biotechnology approvals should be a priority for U.S. negotiators in trade talks, according to a bipartisan group of 37 senators. They expressed this in a letter last week to President Trump. That letter was led by Senate Agriculture Committee Chairman Pat Roberts of Kansas. It urged the president to press China to fulfill commitments to reform its approval process. The U.S. must continue to press China to implement, quoting here, a timely, transparent, and science-based system for the approvals of agricultural biotechnology products. However, the lawmakers urged in their letter, U.S. farmers' use of the technologies is significantly hindered by delays in China's regulatory system as producers to seek access and compete in the global market risk rejection of shipments of grains and oilseeds, the lawmakers wrote. A recent study conducted by Informa Agribusiness Consulting found China's delayed approvals for genetically modified crops have cost the U.S. nearly 34,000 jobs, $7 billion in GDP growth, and $4.6 billion in wages. China announced approvals for 5 GM crops for import: canola, soybeans, and corn, while talks were underway back in January. That move was seen largely as a goodwill gesture. The lawmakers acknowledged those recent limited approvals, but noted that China has yet to make any systemic changes to their regulatory system. Systemic reforms and not just piecemeal approvals are needed, they said, to provide the predictability upon which U.S. producers, technology providers, and exporters rely. The struggling ethanol industry probably will not see a quick increase in demand from the year-round sales of E15 blended gasoline. Here's a closer look at that from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
Gasoline blended with 15% ethanol instead of the standard 10% is not allowed to be sold, of course, during the summer months. The administration working now to allow year-round sales, maybe starting as soon as this summer.
But it's not going to result in an immediate tidal wave of new ethanol demand.
Renewable Fuels Association President Jeff Cooper telling reporters he knows year-round E15 sales would help the struggling ethanol industry.
But we also know that it's going to take time for E15 to spread through the market. There's infrastructure investments that need to be made. There's other things that need to happen.
Some estimates say for a gas retailer to be able to sell E15, it would cost about $250,000 on average for new gas pumps, tanks, and such. Up to now, retailers have not been rushing to do that for a product they can only sell for part of the year. So only about 1% of U.S. gas retailers offer E15 now. But Cooper says allowing sales year-round would
open some doors and get some investment flowing into E15 again.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And you're listening to Agriculture Today. On we go now to the weekly feature from the Kansas Forest Service here at Kansas State University. It's called Tree Tales. And awaiting this time around is K-State Forester Bob Atkinson. Bob?
The Mud Bowl, a new moniker borrowed from the Dust Bowl that natural resource professionals are using to describe Kansas reservoirs filling up with sediment, primarily from stream bank erosion. A significant issue for the state, since 2/3 of our water supply comes from these sources. Trees adjacent to streams and rivers, called riparian forests, have an important role to play in addressing stream bank erosion with this water issue. Tuttle Creek Reservoir has lost 40% of its water storage capacity. In response, the Kansas Forest Service, in collaboration with K-State Research and Extension Forestry, has just published an assessment of the condition of riparian forests in Tuttle Creek watershed. The assessment will guide the restoration work of Kansas Forest Service foresters and other natural resource partners as they provide services to farmers who are interested in improving the health of their woodlands and reducing stream bank erosion. The assessment focused on 10 smaller watersheds north of the towns of Blue Rapids, Frankfort, and Vermilion, based upon input that we received from Tuttle Creek RAPS, a local watershed planning and stakeholder group. To help foresters focus their work, riparian forests were classified into forests in need of establishment, forests in need of management, and forests in need of protection. The assessment found 46% of riparian forests in need of establishment or tree planting, meaning less than 5% of tree cover existed. 20 to 30% was found in need of management to improve species composition by thinning or tree planting, and 20 to 40% were found in need of protection to avoid conversion to other land uses such as cropland. The report suggests hackberry, elm, walnut, and honey locust as the predominant trees, with hackberry representing 75% of natural regeneration. Copies of this report are available by contacting the Kansas Forest Service at 785-532-3300 or check it out on the web at www.kansasforest.org. This is Bob Atkinson with the Kansas Forest Service, encouraging you to protect and manage our riparian forests. You've been listening to another Tree Tale.
And many thanks, Bob. Once more to remind you, check out our podcast service. You can subscribe to that by going to agtoday.net, agtoday.net. This is Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. Shooting sports is one of the many project areas offered to youth by Kansas 4-H. Shooting sports teaches gun safety, hunting skills, and the opportunity for youth to test those skills. Hundreds of Kansas 4-H youth enrolled in shooting sports have qualified for the upcoming Spring 4-H Shooting Sports Match, which will be held at Rock Springs 4-H Center April 13th and 14th. Kansas 4-H Program Coordinator Chris Mullins and 4-H Specialist Pam Van Horn both help coordinate the shooting sports program. In addition to the Spring Shooting Sports Match, Chris says there's a Spring State Training April 4th through the 7th for those wanting to become certified to serve as club leaders for shooting sports. Chris, first off, let's talk just about the shooting sports in general. What are the, 3 areas that you focus on mainly?
So in the spring, we really focus on the BB guns, and then there's the air rifle discipline and the air pistol discipline.
So how do those differentiate?
The air rifle is a longer firearm, and then the air pistol is also just, it looks like a pistol, and they all shoot at different distances, and then the BB gun is what it is. It's a BB gun. So there's a bunch of different kinds, a bunch of different models you can shoot for all 3 different disciplines, and there's quite a few.
The people who have qualified, they have their own BB guns, their own air rifles, air pistols?
Sometimes the individual does, and sometimes the county coordinators or who their coach is will have extras and will loan them out. And then it's just really dependent on what county and what district they're in.
They have been practicing and they have been competing already.
Yes, they've been practicing for quite a long time, and they've had qualifying matches all throughout the state. And once they hit that marker, that score, they can come to the state and compete at the state level.
And that's what it's all about, is getting the score.
Well, it's about, there's a lot of, discipline that comes with this, and it's really about growing our youth and trying to make sure, the score is the ultimate goal, but, if a kid comes in and has fun and enjoys what he's doing, that's really what we're looking for.
So they're also learning firearm safety then?
Exactly. They're learning firearm safety, and they're learning, everything, like I said before, with discipline to self-control, and then just being able to set a mark and trying to hit that.
And this is all run by volunteers?
It is. It's all run by our county coordinators and our county coaches, and without them, we couldn't have this program.
And they are all certified?
Yes, they are. They're all certified. We actually have a state certification coming up April 4th through 7th, and that's going to be held at Rock Springs. If it's something that interests you out in the public, get in contact with your county agent and your county coordinators, and they'll bring it to us.
Go into a little bit more detail with that. What are the type of things that they'll be covering during this certification?
Well, there's all the different disciplines. So there's everything from Western heritage, which is more of a cowboy action type of thing. There's hunting skills, which is more or less not like hunter education, but, they learn the habitat preferences of game species, and then different effective methods to actually hunt them. There's also muzzle loading, then there's pistol, then there's the rifle training, there's also archery and shotgun.
And this is something that you'll cover over several days?
It will be. It'll be covered over several days. You'll register for a certain discipline, and then you'll become a certified instructor at the end of the course.
That they can go back and share that knowledge with all the people enrolled in the shooting sports?
Most definitely. They can go back to their individual counties or districts, and, you're an archery coach, you just got certified, you can get your club going.
Is there an age limit on this, I guess, in terms of how young or how old you can be?
Well, we have a junior apprentice training, which is for 4-H members that are from the ages of 14 to 20 before April 7th, 2019. And once they reach 21, they can retake that apprenticeship test and become a certified instructor, and everyone else 21 and over.
What's the low end in terms of age limit for competing in shooting sports?
9 years old. There's the juniors, which is from 9 to 11, and that's after January 1st, 2019. And then the senior class, which is 12 to 15-year-olds, January 1st, 2019.
And in terms of the state competition, is that how they compete as well in those same categories?
Yes, it is.
How does the state competition work? Set the stage if somebody is out there competing. How does the whole process work?
Well, our state match is actually April 13th and 14th, and they'll be shooting their BB guns on the 13th. And so if you qualify and hit that score for the BB gun discipline, you can come and shoot on the 13th and get registered. And it's pretty much an all-day thing for the BB guns. In the morning, they have a test, and then they go and compete and shoot in the afternoon.
So this is also knowledge-based.
It is. For the BB gun discipline, they're having a test which is based off the DAISY model. There's just a series of questions that they'll ask kids, everything from safety to physics to how the BB gun works.
And they're shooting at a target set up a certain distance away, and they're going to try and score as high as they can, and that also gets then factored in with their test score as well?
That's correct. They'll shoot from 4 different positions: prone, which is laying on the ground, standing, and sitting, and then kneeling. So they'll shoot 10 shots from each of those positions, and then at the end of it, they'll be good to go, and the final score.
And they'll do the same thing then for air rifle and air pistol? Or is the competition different?
It's a little different. The air rifle, air pistol, they won't be taking a written test. And in pistols, they shoot at silhouettes. And then the air rifle, they're at different targets, similar to the BB gun.
This sounds like something that somebody may actually want to watch. Is this a spectator sport or not? I know that there is some shooting going on, but everybody would be behind the shooter.
There have been spectators, and people do watch. So if you know what you're looking for, yes, it can be very intense for the spectators that are watching.
Is there a deadline, or is the registration passed yet?
The deadline's actually Monday, April 1st at 5 p.m.
So you may actually have a couple of hundred people coming in to take part in the shooting sports competition.
Yeah, we'll have a bunch of kids out there, and then they'll bring their family. So it's going to be a really good event. This year we're doing something a little bit different. We're bringing a lot of nonprofit organizations that are going to be there, and they'll talk about like what they do, conservation organizations all the way to mentoring organizations.
So keeping them busy when they're not actually competing.
Yes, definitely, and I think that'll be a new thing, and hopefully our parents and families will enjoy that.
That's Kansas 4-H Program Coordinator Chris Mullins and 4-H Specialist Pam Van Horn. The final state qualifier for shooting sports is this Saturday and Sunday in Holden. Air pistol and air rifle is scheduled for Saturday with BB gun on Sunday. Both events are taking place at the Northeast Kansas Heritage Complex. Again, the spring state training for shooting sports is April 4th through the 7th at Rock Springs 4-H Center, and the 2019 spring shooting sports match is April 13th and 14th at the center. Awards will be given to the top 5 senior and top 5 junior individuals and the top 3 teams in every discipline. Results will be posted on the Kansas 4-H Shooting Sports homepage of the Kansas 4-H website, kansas4h.org. You can learn more about shooting sports or Kansas 4-H by contacting your local extension office or by visiting kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.